The first time Ordak saw a human, he wasn't impressed. The creature male, average height, thin limbs, not even exoskeletal, was hunched over a metal crate, panting. Sweat stained the front of his shirt. His face was flushed, his hair matted to his forehead. The human grunted, gave the crate a kick, and cursed when it didn't budge. Ordak turned his head, his 4 ocular nodes focusing in sequence. "This is the apex species of the 3rd planet," he said. "Yes, Commander," replied the deck officer, a young Tulvani with a nervous twitch in his primary neck ridge. "This one is designated Owen Farris. He was one of the volunteers." Ordak stepped closer to the observation panel. The human had now dropped to one knee, trying to pry something from the crate's underside with a tool that looked more meant for gardening than machinery. A small crowd of Tulvani engineers watched from behind a safety barrier, whispering among themselves. "Weak," Ordak muttered, "and clumsy. If this is the best Earth can offer, I see no reason to extend diplomatic resources." The deck officer said nothing. He had seen the footage from the training camp's humans climbing steel towers in sub-zero temperatures, dragging wounded teammates over sand dunes, building shelters from nothing but rock and plastic. But Ordak hadn't seen those. Ordak only saw what was in front of him, and what was in front of him was a tired man wrestling a box. Inside the work bay, Owen finally stood up. He dropped the tool, adjusted the back support brace on his belt, and cracked his knuckles. His arms were trembling. Then he crouched low, got his hands under the crate's base, and lifted. The crate didn't move at first. His legs strained, muscles taut, neck veins bulging. One of the Tulvani engineers whispered something and the others chuckled. Then, with a guttural yell, Owen heaved upward. The crate rose off the ground. Only a few centimeters, but it was up. The whispering stopped. It was a standard cargo crate, titanium alloy, reinforced for intra-atmospheric transport. It weighed 260 kilograms. Owen Farris, according to the ship's med logs, weighed 131. He held it for 4 seconds, then dropped it with a metallic thud that echoed across the bay. He stumbled back, slumped against the wall, and slid down to the floor. His breaths came in ragged bursts. He laughed once, dryly. Ordak stared through the glass, unmoving. "Schedule a strength capacity test," he said. "Yes, Commander." Ordak turned toward the exit. "And find out how many of them can do that." 3 hours later, Owen was lying on a cot in the med bay, both knees wrapped in compression sheaths. A Tulvani medic scanned his lower back with a neural imaging wand. "You've strained your sacral ligaments," the medic said, "and your L4 disc is partially compressed. You'll need 3 days of rest with anti-inflammatory treatment." Owen winced as he adjusted his position. "Just don't tell my wife. She already thinks this whole thing is insane." "You lifted twice your body weight," the medic said. "That is not typical for your species. Not without help, or training, or a serious lapse in judgment," Owen groaned. "I'm guessing this means I passed your little strength test?" The medic tilted its head. "There was no test scheduled." Owen blinked. "Seriously? I thought that crate was." "Never mind." The door hissed open. Ordak entered, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the med bay floor. "You were injured," he said. Owen raised an eyebrow. "Nice to see you, too. You lifted that crate without assistance." "Yeah, that was kind of the point," Owen said. "Wanted to prove we're not just noodle-armed softies." Ordak stepped closer. "Explain why." Owen exhaled slowly. "Because your people think we're weak. I heard the chatter. I saw the looks. You all talk like you've already figured us out. But we're not what you think. Your biology is limited. Your musculature inefficient. Our bones break," Owen interrupted. "But they also heal. We adapt. Fast. You know how long it took me to learn your cargo systems? 2 days. You know how long it took me to learn your language? A week. We're not built like you, but we're not helpless." Ordak studied him for a moment, Your defiance is noted. Call it what it is, Owen said. Determination. Ordak left without responding. Over the next 2 days, Owen followed the medic's orders. He stayed off his feet, took the anti-inflammatories, and rested. He ignored the sideways glances from Tulvani crew members in the corridors. He didn't care if they thought he was reckless. On the 3rd day, he walked into the engineering bay with a limp and a toolkit. Morning, he said. The Tulvani lead technician looked confused. You are not scheduled for duty. I'm aware, Owen said, kneeling beside a damaged relay panel. But your phase modulator's misaligned. I heard the hum all the way down the hall. Figured I'd fix it. The technician hesitated. You are still injured. Yeah, Owen said, pulling open the panel. And I'm still useful. An hour later, the relay was fixed. Owen stood, wiped his hands, and winced as his back twinged. The technician handed him a hydration capsule. You are unusual, the technician said. Thanks, Owen said. I think. The next week was quieter. Owen resumed his assigned duties, mostly logistical support and minor repairs. The Tulvani engineers began speaking to him more. Some even asked questions. One afternoon, a young Tulvani named Fen approached him in the corridor. Is it true, Fen asked, that your kind sometimes deliberately places yourselves in dangerous environments to test your limits? You mean like mountain climbing? Owen asked. Yeah. Or deep-sea diving. Or space jumps. Or ultramarathons through deserts. Fen blinked slowly. Why? Because we want to know how far we can go, Owen said. Because we get bored. Because sometimes proving you can survive something is just satisfying. Fen stared at him for a long moment. You are very strange. Thanks. 2 days later, the Tulvani vessel received a distress call from a mining outpost orbiting Drelvik 9. A containment field had failed. A cargo tram had derailed. Several workers were trapped beneath debris. Owen was in the shuttle before anyone asked him to be. The descent was rough. Turbulence shook the cabin. The pilot barked something in Tulvani about structural instability. Owen just tightened his harness and gritted his teeth. When they landed, the scene was chaos. The outpost ceiling had partially collapsed. A support beam had crushed the tram's rear carriage. 3 workers were pinned inside. Ordak arrived moments later, flanked by 2 engineers. We have to lift the beam, one said. It weighs 300 kilograms, Ordak replied. We need mechanical assistance. Owen stepped forward. No time. The containment field's degrading. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this section vents atmosphere. Ordak hesitated. Owen dropped his pack, wrapped his hands in grip tape, and approached the beam. You were injured, Ordak said. I'm healing, Owen replied. And I'm not letting them die. He crouched beside the beam, adjusted his stance, and braced. Help me stabilize it, he told 2 nearby Tulvani. When I lift, you pull them out. The beam was heavier than the crate. It pressed down like a slab of concrete. Owen groaned, muscles screaming in protest. His back flared with pain. He bit down and pushed harder. It rose. The trapped workers scrambled free. One of the Tulvani stumbled, nearly falling. Owen held the beam just long enough for the last one to crawl clear. Then he let go. The beam slammed into the floor. Owen collapsed beside it, gasping for breath. His vision blurred. Ordak knelt beside him. Your injuries. Yeah, Owen said, his voice hoarse. I'm gonna need that med bay again. Ordak looked at him, then back at the freed workers. You saved them. Just doing what needed doing. For the first time since arriving on the Tulvani ship, Owen saw something on Ordak's face that wasn't disdain. Respect. When they returned to the vessel, Owen was taken straight to the med bay. Scans revealed a torn lower back ligament and a strained quadriceps. 4 to 6 weeks recovery, the medic said. You are pushing your physiology too far. Owen grunted. I've been worse. You have not. He didn't argue. During his recovery, Tulvani crew members visited him. Fen brought him nutrient packs. The lead technician brought a schematic Owen had requested. Even Ordak stopped by once, standing silently for several minutes before saying, We underestimated you. Owen nodded. You weren't the first. You may not be the strongest species, Ordak said, but you are formidable. That's good enough for me. The Tulvani ship departed Earth orbit 3 weeks later, headed for the outer colonies. Owen, still walking with a slight limp, watched the planet shrink behind them. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. But he knew he would again, because that's what humans did. 3 days after the rescue at Drelvik 9, Owen stood barefoot in the ship's hydrotherapy chamber, hip-deep in cold saline water, holding a weighted bar across his shoulders while 2 Tulvani medical technicians observed from behind a transparent barrier. "You're sure this is necessary?" he asked, glancing down at the water's faint ripple around his knees. "Your species' musculoskeletal recovery benefits from resistance training and cold immersion according to Earth medical documentation," one technician replied. "We consulted your onboard physician's database." Owen nodded once. "Just checking. Last time someone said we consulted, I ended up with a tube down my nose and no warning." He lowered into a squat slowly, grimacing as the tension pulled across his right thigh. When he stood again, his breath hitched. "You should pause," said the second technician, whose eye ridges had flattened in concern. "Not yet," Owen said. "I've got 2 more sets." "You persist beyond safe limits," the first technician said. "Why risk further strain?" He adjusted his grip slightly, flexed his fingers, and replied, "Because if I don't push the limits, I never know where they are. And I can't afford to guess when it counts." The bar dipped again. Every movement was deliberate now, every breath timed. The muscle above his hip twinged halfway through the second rep, but he finished the set. When he climbed out of the water, the technicians handed him a thermal wrap and a nutrient gel. He used both without comment. Hours later, Owen stood inside the ship's arboretum, one of the few places aboard with simulated gravity variation. The Tulvani used it for botanical research, but Owen had noticed the gravity shifts made his balance work harder. So he'd started walking laps. Today, the arboretum was occupied by a group of Tulvani youth cadets or interns, maybe. They watched him circle the path along the upper ledge, whispering in their native clicks and pulses. Owen didn't acknowledge them until one stepped forward, arms held in a gesture he'd learned meant curiosity, not challenge. "You do this daily?" the cadet asked in careful English. Owen looped around again before answering. "Yeah. Helps with coordination. Keeps me from walking like a broken shopping cart." The cadet tilted his head. "You repeatedly expose yourself to gravitational instability. Is this how all humans train?" "Most of us just call it walking on uneven ground," he said. "But yeah, adapting to weird environments is kind of our thing." "Ever heard of ice climbing?" The cadet's face stiffened. "Climbing frozen vertical surfaces?" "Yep, with just metal picks and boots." Several of the youths exchanged looks. One muttered something that Owen didn't catch, but it ended with a sharp chirp, probably disbelief. "You are not designed for such tasks." "Neither are goats," Owen said, stepping off the ledge and landing cleanly on the mossy floor. "But they figured out mountains just fine." Later that cycle, a request came through the internal comms. Owen was to report to the ship's fabrication bay for a demonstration review. He arrived wearing a compression brace on his lower back and a loose-fitted utility vest. The fabrication bay was humming with activity cutters sparking in the corner, a plasma extruder winding through a sheet of alloy. At the center, a 6-limbed Tulvani named Retho adjusted a large cylindrical housing that appeared to be part of a mining drone. "You called?" Owen asked, stepping over a coil of insulated tubing. Retho turned, his upper arms folding behind him. "You are to replicate a standard containment seal under field conditions. No hydraulic tools. No structural stabilizers." Owen raised an eyebrow. "You're testing me again?" "This is not a test," Retho said. "It is a curiosity. Your previous performance produced conflicting data." "Fine," Owen said. "Show me what I'm sealing." Retho tapped a command into a panel. The housing rotated, revealing a warped flange with jagged scoring along the edge. A coolant line trailed from the base, dripping faintly onto the floor. "Manual seal replacement," Retho said. "Simulating mid-mission failure. No atmospheric controls." Owen knelt and examined the damage. The scoring looked like stress from a pressure surge, not external damage. He peeled back a layer of insulation and checked the fasteners. They were sunk into a recessed groove with barely any clearance. "Who designed this?" he muttered. "It is Tulvani standard. That explains a lot." He rolled his shoulder once, then reached into a side pouch and pulled out an earth-made ratchet with a flexible head. The Tulvani watched in silence as he began unseating the fasteners, his hands moving with practiced economy. 20 minutes later, sweat clinging to his brow, he slid the new seal into place with the edge of a multi-tool. The fit was tight. He used a heat strip to expand the gasket briefly, then locked it in with a twist and a punch from the ratchet. As he stood, he stretched his back gently and glanced at Rether. "You timed that." 17 minutes, Rether said. "Your respiration increased only marginally. No visible signs of fatigue beyond perspiration. Not bad for someone with a healing ligament." Rether's antennae twitched. "This is the third time you have completed a task that should exceed your safe biomechanical thresholds. Is your species structurally inconsistent?" Owen grabbed a towel from a nearby hook and wiped his hands. "We're not inconsistent. Just variable. There's a difference. How do you know your limits?" "Trial and error," Owen said. "Mostly error." That evening, as artificial dusk settled across the ship, Owen sat in the mess hall with a lukewarm bowl of protein paste and a small cup of Earth-imported coffee. He was halfway through decoding the ship's maintenance logs when Ordak entered and took the seat opposite him. "You've been active," Ordak said. "Figured lying down all day wasn't helping my recovery," Owen said, not looking up from the tablet. "You should know," Ordak said, "that your presence has triggered a request from the upper console. Of the ship. Of our interstellar operations division," Ordak said. "They want a full behavioral profile. Your actions have disrupted several internal assumptions." Owen finally looked up. "You mean they can't figure out why I haven't quit yet? Or collapsed?" He sipped his coffee. "Well, if you'd built your cargo seals with actual finger clearance, I might have." Ordak ignored the jab. "They have also requested a simulation." "What kind of simulation?" "Environmental stress testing. Multivariable. You will be enclosed in a rotating chamber with shifting gravity, variable light, sound distortion, and cognitive interference stimuli." Owen blinked. "So, sensory hell." "Yes." He stirred his coffee slowly. "Can I eat first?" The simulation chamber looked like someone had mashed together an amusement park ride and a psychological experiment. It rotated vertically and horizontally, and the interior was covered in light panels that pulsed at irregular intervals. A Tulvani technician handed Owen a set of goggles and a headband with electrodes. "You must remain upright and complete a sequence of logic tasks," she said. "Response time and motor control will be recorded. What happens if I puke? That will also be recorded." The chamber locked shut behind him. Moments later, it spun. By the fifth rotation, Owen's stomach was doing backflips. The lights flickered in strobes, and garbled Tulvani phrases played through the speakers. He squinted at the floating datapad in front of him, trying to align color-coded shapes while the floor tilted 30 degrees. The third puzzle was a spatial rotation matrix. He got it right in under 10 seconds. The sixth was a language cipher. He missed 1 out of 20. When the chamber stopped, his shirt was soaked, his legs wobbled, and his eyes struggled to adjust to the normal lighting again. Ordak was waiting outside, arms folded. "That was excessive," Owen muttered, pulling off the goggles. "You scored within the top percentile of Tulvani cognitive stress benchmarks. I also nearly blacked out during the Morse code loop." "We have no Morse code." Owen blinked. "Then what the hell was that tapping?" Ordak didn't answer. Instead, he handed Owen a small data chip. "This is a request from the upper console. They want you to accompany the next planetary mission. A joint team. No observers. Active participation. Owen took the chip. What kind of mission? Uncertain terrain. Potential hostiles. High unpredictability. So, Tuesday. Ordak gave a single nod. Prepare yourself. Departure is in 2 days. Owen stood, legs still shaky. I'll bring the ratchet. The shuttle's interior was cooler than expected, and Owen had to rub his palms together to coax some warmth back into his fingers. Gravity had been dialed down slightly for fuel efficiency, which gave every movement a floaty awkwardness. He adjusted the strap of his field pack and leaned back against the bulkhead as the launch countdown ticked towards 0. Across from him sat 3 Tulvani, Rether, Fen, and a third he hadn't met before, whose environmental suit bore a dark green insignia he didn't recognize. None of them spoke. Just the low hum of the shuttle's systems and the occasional hiss of atmosphere cycling through the vents. Does anyone want to explain where we're going? Owen asked. Fen shifted slightly. The surface of Kirellan Four. Mineral Survey Station Theta 12. What's wrong with Theta 12? It hasn't answered transmissions in 72 standard hours. Rether adjusted a setting on his wrist panel. There was a seismic event in the region. The station may have suffered structural damage or loss of primary systems. The third Tulvani, still silent, kept his gaze fixed on Owen. Right, Owen said. And we're going down there because I'm good at fixing things and ignoring pain. You are not equipped with mission-specific augments, the third Tulvani said. His voice was flatter than the others, less curious, more clinical. You are, however, adaptable. We are testing whether that compensates. Testing again, Owen muttered. You guys sure love your field experiments. Your continued participation is voluntary, the third said. Voluntary like jumping into a cold lake because someone dared you. Not smart, but too late to say no. The shuttle rattled as it cut into the upper atmosphere of Kirellan Four. The windows dimmed automatically as heat flared across the hull. Owen closed his eyes and counted each breath until the shaking stopped. They landed on a flat ridge of reddish stone. The sky was a pale violet and the wind carried a dry, metallic scent. The station Theta 12 was a squat dome of serosteel and polymer, half covered by dust and jagged rock. One of the outer panels had collapsed inward. The access hatch wouldn't respond to biometric scans, so Owen pulled out a manual override kit and popped the casing off. He worked in silence, using a short-bladed screwdriver and a loop of conductive filament. You are bypassing the lock? Rether asked. No. I'm asking it nicely with a crowbar. The panel gave way after a minute of coaxing. The hatch hissed open, stale air leaking into the breeze. Inside was dark, the emergency lights casting dull blue shadows over the corridor walls. The 4 of them moved in, boots crunching over debris. Just past the entry chamber, they found the first body. It was a Tulvani tech specialist, crumpled beneath a fallen conduit beam. No sign of trauma beyond the impact. Power grid failed, Fen said quietly. No grav anchors. When the tremor hit, the stabilizers didn't engage. They passed 2 more lifeless figures on the way to the central command room. Owen didn't speak. He recognized the look in Fen's eyes, part horror, part guilt, part calculation. Inside the command room, the consoles were dark. Rether activated a portable generator and plugged into the main interface. After a few seconds, the central monitor flickered to life. Logs confirmed seismic activity at approximately 18 hours before last transmission, he said. Multiple aftershocks followed. Final entry is timestamped 4 hours later. Owen stepped up beside him. What were they doing before the quake? Routine survey cycles. No anomalies reported. The third Tulvani moved to the auxiliary console and started copying data. We will need to extract the mineral samples stored in containment. The upper console requested physical confirmation. Of course they did, Owen muttered. They found the containment bay sealed tight. The locking mechanism had twisted in the quake, jamming the door in its housing. Owen knelt beside it, checked the angles, and pulled out a pair of carbon wedges from his pack. This'll take a while. Panels torqued. Rether crouched beside him. Do you require assistance? You can hold the light. He pried the wedges in, tapped them gently with a flat mallet, and worked the pressure evenly across the seam. After several long minutes, the frame shuddered and gave a sharp groan. The door slid half open. Inside were 6 transparent canisters, each containing a fine powder that shimmered faintly under the emergency lighting. These matched the mineral readings, Fenn said. Still viable. Owen stepped in, grabbed the nearest canister, and paused. Do any of these react to sudden movement? No, good. Because I really don't want to explode today. They extracted all 6 canisters, loading them into a reinforced crate. As they secured the lid, the floor gave a low, drawn-out creak. That's not good, Owen said. Another creak. Then a sharp crack. The lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. Get to the shuttle, the third Tulvani ordered. They moved fast, but not fast enough. By the time they reached the corridor, a section had collapsed, burying the path back to the hatch in twisted bulkheads and broken support beams. Secondary exit? Owen asked. There is none, Rether said. Standard design only includes a single ingress. Owen looked at the rubble. We can clear it. Not before structural collapse, Fenn replied. This facility was not built for redundancy. The third Tulvani tapped his comm, no signal. The rock strata interferes with transmission. So we're stuck, Owen said. Rether nodded slowly. Unless we ascend through the vertical maintenance shaft in the supply wing. Fenn frowned. That shaft was deprecated. Safety brackets were never installed. It leads directly to the surface, Rether said. If structural integrity holds, we may exit that way. They reached the shaft 10 minutes later. The access ladder was still attached to the inner wall, but one of the anchor bolts had sheared clean off, leaving the lower section swaying gently. Owen stepped forward. I'll go first. If the ladder holds my weight, it'll hold yours. Fenn's brow creased. Why not allow one of us to test it? Because if it snaps, I've got better odds of reacting mid-fall. He grasped the side rails and pulled himself up. The ladder groaned, but held. At 5 meters, he paused to catch his breath, then continued. By the time he reached the top, his hands were raw and his knees ached, but the hatch above him was intact. He forced it open with a crowbar and waved down through the shaft. One at a time. Rether came next, then Fenn. The third Tulvani waited until last, scanning for signs of strain in the shaft structure. When he emerged, Owen was already unsealing the emergency flare beacon from his pack. They activated the beacon and waited. The shuttle's automated systems had a recovery protocol for surface flares. Within 20 minutes, they heard the distant whine of engines. Back aboard, Owen sat on the floor of the cargo bay, arms draped over his knees. His left thigh throbbed and his elbow sported a fresh gash from the ladder wall, but he was grinning through the exhaustion. You were injured, said the third Tulvani, glancing down at him. Nothing that'll kill me, Owen said. I've had worse from slipping in the shower. You chose the most hazardous position each time, Rether said. Why? Because if someone had to fall, better me than someone who can't heal as fast. Fenn tilted his head. You assume your recovery is superior? No. I assume I'm used to it. The shuttle docked with the main vessel an hour later. Medics met them at the airlock. Owen waved them off until the crate had been secured in the analysis bay. It wasn't until he was back in the med wing, shirt off and hooked to a fluid drip, that Ordak arrived. I reviewed the mission report, Ordak said, standing beside the diagnostic table. You disobeyed standard safety hierarchy. Not the first time. You endangered yourself disproportionately. Also not new. Ordak held up a small datapad. The mineral samples you recovered, do you know what they're for? Not exactly. I was a bit occupied crawling through a ventilation shaft. They're catalysts, Ordak said, used in stabilizing experimental warp fields. Unrefined samples are volatile, but in specific conditions they can increase efficiency by nearly 20%. Owen blinked. So we nearly got crushed over a fuel upgrade? A breakthrough, Ordak said. One that may open new sectors to exploration. You know, Owen said, shifting slightly on the table. If you'd told me that before, I might have complained a little more. Would you have refused the mission? He shook his head. Probably not. Ordak leaned forward slightly. Why? Because if it's worth doing, it's worth bleeding for. There was a long pause. Then Ordak placed the datapad on the counter and turned to leave. You are not structurally superior, he said. But your decisions defy expectation. That is a strength we had not accounted for. The door hissed closed behind him. Owen stared at the ceiling for a while, then muttered to himself. If you guys ever find out what duct tape is, you're going to be really dangerous.